In Leibniz theory of monadology, the universe is composed of a vast number of elementary units called monads. Will Durant says about this idea, "We shall understand the monads better if we think of them in imitation of the notion that we have of souls, as each soul is a simple separate person, a solitary ego alone against the world, fighting its way by its own internal will against everything outside it. So each monad is essentially alone, a separate independent center of force. Every monad is unique. In the entire cosmos, there are no two beings completely alike. Each monad feels, however confusedly and unconsciously, that it constitutes the whole universe. In this way, it is a mirror more or less, obscurely reflecting and representing the world. And as no individual mind can really look into another mind, so no single monad can see into another." Jung takes up the idea of objective self-knowledge. This is related to Leibniz's idea that each of the separated monads sees the universe as an objective reality outside of itself. Similarly, the ego can regard the psyche objectively. Jung says, "This objective knowledge of the self is that no one can know himself unless he knows what or not who he is, on what he depends or whose he is, or to whom or what he belongs, and for what end he was made." The distinction between quis and quid, who and what, is crucial. Whereas quis has an unmistakably personal aspect and refers to the ego, quid is neuter, predicating nothing except an object which is not endowed even with personality. Not the subjective ego consciousness of the psyche is meant, but the psyche itself as the unknown, unprejudiced object that still has to be investigated. In Mysterium Conjunctionis, Jung further remarks, "The production of the arcane substance, the generario mercury, is possible only for one who has full knowledge of the doctrine, but we cannot be resolved of any doubt except by experiment, and there is no better way than to make the experiment on ourselves." These two ideas are related because the experimental attitude is part of a so-called objective attitude. One cannot experiment with an entity unless one takes an objective attitude toward it. But then we must ask what it means to have an objective attitude about oneself. Actually, that is the whole effort of the analytical process. However, to have any hope for success in a certain way, one has to start with it too. There has to be a latent potential objective attitude toward oneself, or one can never get started toward objectivity, remaining hopelessly one of those fish in the fish pond. One can't take an objective attitude toward water as long as one is a fish swimming around in it. The ability to take an objective attitude toward the psyche, to see one's own psychology as an objective living process, is evidence that consciousness is present. Jung puts the importance of this by saying, "The final factors at work in us are nothing other than those talents which a certain nobleman entrusted to his servants, that they might trade with them. It does not require much imagination to see what this involvement in the ways of the world means in the moral sense. Only an infantile person can pretend that evil is not at work everywhere, and the more unconscious he is, the more the devil drives him. It is just because of this inner connection with the black side of things that it is so incredibly easy for the mass man to commit the most appalling crimes without thinking. Only ruthless self-knowledge on the widest scale, which sees good and evil in correct perspective and can weigh up the motives of human action, offers some guarantee that the end result will not turn out too badly." The operative phrase here is ruthless self-knowledge. Ruthless self-knowledge is totally impossible unless it is objective. This is so regarding the awareness of evil, which is what Jung is talking about in this paragraph. Because if one perceives evil in the psyche subjectively rather than objectively, it is instantly demoralizing. The ego identifies personally with the evil it perceives, and then there is no more ruthlessness. The ego has become so laden down with guilt that it can't function any longer as a perceiver. The ego starts blaming itself. It falls into the pit of guilt. So in order to have ruthless self-knowledge, in order to perceive the full existence of darkness in the psyche, one has to perceive the individual psyche as an object rather than as a subject. In other words, to perceive the psyche as not the ego. One has to see clearly that although the ego is doing the perceiving, the whole of the psyche is an objective entity, and that whole is not made by the ego, but is only discovered by it. It is discovered by experiment, the same way that the alchemist and later science discovered the nature of the outer world. We do not create ourselves, we are created. That means that what we discover in the individual psyche is what has been created, not what we have made. What we are in our totality and what we find there is not our subjective responsibility. What we do with it in reality is our responsibility. That ability to take a radically objective attitude toward the nature of the individual psyche is indispensable to any significant consciousness.